warm glow of the setting sun painted Maplewood in hues of orange and gold as Ethan sat perched on the windowsill of his second-floor bedroom. His eyes were fixed on the driveway, where his Aunt Margaret's sleek black car had just pulled up. There was something about her that both fascinated and unnerved him, a mystery that hung around her like an invisible cloak. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. As Margaret stepped out of the car, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders, Ethan couldn't help but notice the grace with which she moved. She paused for a moment, looking up at the house, and their eyes met briefly. Ethan quickly ducked away from the window, his heart racing. He wasn't sure why he felt so nervous around her, but there was an undeniable tension in the air whenever she visited. From downstairs, he could hear the muffled sounds of greetings being exchanged. His parents' voices were hushed, almost cautious, as if they were trying to keep secrets from the very walls of their home. Ethan strained to hear what they were saying, but the words were too faint to make out. A few minutes later, soft footsteps approached his room. There was a gentle knock on the door, and Margaret's voice called out, "Ethan, may I come in?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before replying, "Yes, Aunt Margaret." The door creaked open, and Margaret stepped inside. She was dressed in a flowing black dress that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her green eyes, so much like Ethan's own, sparkled with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he held her gaze, determined to unravel the mystery that surrounded her. "How are you, my dear?" Margaret asked, her voice smooth and melodious. She moved to sit on the edge of Ethan's bed, her movements fluid and graceful. "I'm fine," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He watched as Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. "What's that?" He couldn't help but ask. Margaret smiled, a secretive curl of her lips that made Ethan's curiosity burn even brighter. "This? Oh, it's just a little project I've been working on. Would you like to see?" Ethan nodded eagerly, moving closer to get a better look. As Margaret opened the notebook, he caught glimpses of intricate sketches and swirling patterns that seemed to dance across the pages. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. "It's beautiful," he breathed, reaching out to touch the paper but stopping short, afraid to smudge the delicate lines. "Thank you, Ethan," Margaret said, her voice warm with pride. "Art has always been a passion of mine. It's a way to express the inexpressible, to capture moments and feelings that words alone can't describe." As they pored over the notebook together, Ethan felt some of his nervousness begin to fade. There was something comforting about the way Margaret explained her artwork, the stories behind each sketch, and the emotions they represented. For a moment, he almost forgot about the tension he had sensed earlier, but as the night wore on and Margaret bid him good night, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her visits than just sharing her art. He lay awake long after she had gone, listening to the hushed voices of his parents drifting up from downstairs. "I don't know if this is a good idea," he heard his mother say, her voice tight with worry. "What if—" His father's response was too low to make out, but the concern in his tone was unmistakable. Ethan tossed and turned, his mind racing with questions. What were they so worried about? What was Aunt Margaret really doing here? The next morning, as Ethan made his way downstairs for breakfast, he could feel the lingering tension in the air. His parents exchanged meaningful glances over their coffee cups, falling silent as soon as he entered the room. It was clear they were keeping something from him, and the weight of their unspoken concerns hung heavy in the atmosphere. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Ethan decided to confront Margaret during her next visit. As the sun set once again over Maplewood, casting long shadows across his room, he steeled himself for the conversation ahead. When Margaret arrived and settled into her usual spot on his bed, Ethan took a deep breath and asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Aunt Margaret, what are you really doing here?" Margaret's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her face before being replaced by a knowing smile. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I was wondering when you'd ask, Ethan. How would you like to be part of a very special project?" As Margaret began to explain, Ethan felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel long-held family secrets and change his life forever. The next evening, Ethan's room was transformed into a makeshift art studio. Margaret arrived with an array of paints, brushes, and a large blank canvas. The air was thick with the scent of acrylic and possibility. "Tonight," Margaret announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement, "we're going to create something special together, a mural that tells our family's story." Ethan felt a mixture of curiosity and nervousness as he picked up a brush. "But I'm not very good at painting," he admitted, his voice small. Margaret's laugh was warm and reassuring. "Art isn't about being good, Ethan. It's about expression, about letting your feelings flow through the brush onto the canvas. There are no mistakes in art, only happy accidents." As they began to work, Ethan found himself relaxing. The rhythmic strokes of the brush against canvas were soothing, and Margaret's presence was comforting in a way he hadn't expected. They chatted as they painted, and slowly, Margaret began to share stories from her own childhood. "You know, when I was about your age," she said, dipping her brush in a vibrant blue, "I struggled a lot with feeling like I didn't fit in. The other kids at school, they could be cruel sometimes." Ethan's hand paused mid-stroke. He looked at his aunt, surprised by her candor. "Really? But you always seem so confident." Margaret smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "That confidence came later, after a lot of hard work and self-reflection. Back then, I felt lost and alone, but I found solace in art. It became my way of making sense of the world, of expressing things I couldn't say out loud." As she spoke, Ethan felt a connection forming between them. He thought about his own struggles at school, the times he'd felt out of place or misunderstood. Without realizing it, he began to paint those feelings onto the canvas. Swirls of dark blue for sadness, sharp lines of red for anger, soft yellows for hope. Margaret watched him work, her expression thoughtful. "You're more of an artist than you give yourself credit for, Ethan. Look at how you're channeling your emotions into the painting." Encouraged by her words, Ethan opened up about his own experiences. He told her about the time he'd been picked last for the soccer team, the birthday party he wasn't invited to, the test he'd failed despite studying hard. As he spoke, his brush moved with more confidence, adding layers and depth to their shared creation. The hours flew by, and before Ethan knew it, it was well past his usual bedtime. But he didn't feel tired. Instead, he felt invigorated, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "This is amazing," he said, stepping back to admire their work. The mural was a riot of colors and shapes, abstract yet somehow deeply meaningful. It's like our feelings are right there on the canvas." Margaret nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "That's exactly what it is, Ethan. We've created a visual representation of our shared experiences, our joys, and our pains. This is the power of art. It allows us to see our emotions from a new perspective." As they cleaned up, Ethan felt a surge of inspiration. "Can we add more to it tomorrow night? I want to include some of my favorite memories too, like the summer I spent at Grandma and Grandpa's farm." Margaret's smile was warm and genuine. "Of course we can. This mural is a living thing, just like our family history. We can keep adding to it, layer upon layer, just like the stories that make up our lives." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, His mind was buzzing with ideas for the mural. He thought about the stories Margaret had shared and how they resonated with his own experiences. For the first time since his aunt's arrival, he felt truly excited about her visits. But even as he drifted off to sleep, a small part of him couldn't help but wonder. Why had his parents seemed so worried about Margaret's presence? And why did he sometimes catch a flicker of something? Was it sadness? Regret? In Margaret's eyes when she thought he wasn't looking? Little did Ethan know, the mural they were creating was just the beginning. As they continued to paint and share stories, layers of family history would be revealed. Some beautiful, some painful. All of them integral to understanding who they were and where they came from. The canvas was becoming a mirror, reflecting not just their art, but the complex tapestry of their family's past, present, and future. As the days passed, Ethan found himself looking forward to Margaret's nightly visits with growing enthusiasm. The mural was taking shape, a vibrant tapestry of colors and memories that stretched across his bedroom wall. However, not everyone in the house shared his excitement. One afternoon, as Ethan was heading up to his room, he overheard his mother, Sarah, talking to his father in hushed tones. "I don't know about this, John," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with worry. "Margaret's presence here, it's stirring up things that were better left in the past." Ethan paused on the stairs, his heart racing. What things? What past? He strained to hear more, but his father's reply was too low to make out. Confused and curious, Ethan retreated to his room, his mind swirling with questions. Later that evening, as Margaret and Ethan worked on the mural, he couldn't help but study his aunt more closely. There was a grace to her movements, a hint of sadness in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. He wondered about the life she had lived, the experiences that had shaped her into the woman she was today. "Aunt Margaret," Ethan began hesitantly, "can you tell me more about when you were younger? What was it like growing up with Mom?" Margaret's hand paused mid-brushstroke, a flicker of something. Pain, regret, crossing her face before she composed herself. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, "those were complicated times. Your mother and I, we had our struggles, as all siblings do." She resumed painting, her strokes more deliberate now. "But there were good times too. I remember this one summer when we built a treehouse together. Your mother was always the practical one, making sure the structure was sound, while I was more concerned with how we decorate it." Ethan laughed, easily imagining his mother fussing over the safety of the treehouse. But as Margaret continued to share stories, he noticed a pattern. The happy memories always seemed to have an undercurrent of melancholy, as if they were tinged with some unspoken sorrow. The next day, driven by curiosity, Ethan ventured into the attic. Amid the dust and forgotten treasures, he stumbled upon a box of old photographs. As he sifted through them, he found several featuring Margaret in her younger years. In one, she stood with a group of friends, their arms around each other, wide smiles on their faces. But looking closer, Ethan noticed something off about their expressions. Despite the smiles, there was a sadness in their eyes, a tension in their postures that spoke of hidden pain. That night, Ethan showed the photos to Margaret. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She gasped softly, her fingers trembling as she took the pictures from him. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Where did you find these?" "In the attic," he replied, watching her closely. "Aunt Margaret, what happened? Everyone looks happy, but not really. Why?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the photographs. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "These were taken during a very difficult time in my life, Ethan. My friends and I, we just experienced a terrible loss. a friend of ours, had passed away unexpectedly. She took a deep breath, her gaze still locked on the images of her younger self. We were trying so hard to be normal, to pretend that everything was okay. But grief has a way of seeping through the cracks, no matter how hard you try to hide it. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He'd never seen his aunt look so vulnerable. "Is that why you left? Because of what happened?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Partly, yes. I needed to get away, to find myself again. But in doing so, I left behind people who needed me. Your mother. She never quite forgave me for that." As they sat there, surrounded by the half-finished mural and the ghosts of the past, Ethan began to understand the complexity of family relationships. The mural they were creating wasn't just a collection of happy memories. It was a testament to the full spectrum of human experience, joy and sorrow intertwined. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the photographs, about the pain hidden behind the smiles. He realized that every family had its secrets, its unspoken truths. And somehow, he knew that the mural was becoming more than just an art project. It was a key, slowly unlocking the mysteries of his family's past. Little did he know, the biggest revelations were yet to come, waiting to be unveiled with each brushstroke on their shared canvas. As the mural continued to grow, so did the bond between Ethan and Margaret. Their nightly painting sessions became a sanctuary, a time when secrets could be shared and wounds could begin to heal. It was during one of these sessions that Ethan decided to broach a subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Aunt Margaret," he began, his brush hovering over the canvas, "can we talk about Grandpa?" Margaret's hand stilled, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft patter of rain against the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with emotion. "Your grandfather. He was a remarkable man, Ethan. What would you like to know?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Mom doesn't talk about him much. I know he passed away before I was born, but what was he like?" Margaret's eyes grew distant, a small smile playing on her lips. "He was the kindest soul I've ever known, always ready with a joke or a word of encouragement. He had this way of making you feel like you could conquer the world." As she spoke, Margaret began to paint again, her strokes creating the outline of a man with kind eyes and a warm smile. Ethan watched in awe as his grandfather's face emerged on the canvas. "He was an artist too, you know," Margaret continued. "He's the one who taught me to paint. We used to spend hours in his studio, just the two of us, creating worlds with our brushes." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "I wish I could have known him," he said softly. Margaret turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Oh, Ethan, he would have adored you. You have his spirit, you know. That curiosity, that desire to understand the world through art. That's all him." As they continued to paint, Margaret shared more stories about Ethan's grandfather. She told him about the time they built a makeshift raft and sailed it down the creek behind their house, about the elaborate treasure hunts he would create for her and Sarah on rainy days, about the way he could always make them laugh, even on the darkest days. But as the night wore on, Ethan noticed a change in Margaret's demeanor. Her stories became tinged with a profound sadness, and her brushstrokes grew more erratic. "Aunt Margaret," Ethan said gently, "what aren't you telling me?" Margaret set down her brush, her shoulders sagging. "Your grandfather's death. It wasn't just a loss, Ethan. It was the event that tore our family apart." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "I was there when it happened. We were in his studio, painting together like we always did. And then, he just collapsed. I couldn't save him, Ethan. I tried, but I couldn't." Tears were flowing freely down Margaret's cheeks now. Ethan, moved by her pain, wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug. They stayed like that for a long moment, sharing in their grief for a man Ethan had never known, but suddenly felt deeply connected to. As they pulled apart, Ethan noticed movement at his bedroom door. His mother, Sarah, stood there, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. For a moment, Ethan feared she would be angry, but instead, she slowly walked into the room, her eyes fixed on the portrait of her father on the mural. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, reaching out to touch the painted face. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she turned to Margaret. I'm sorry. I've been so angry for so long, but he wouldn't have wanted this. He would have wanted us to be a family." The three of them stood there, surrounded by the mural that had become a bridge between past and present. As they looked at each other, years of unspoken words and buried emotions began to surface. Sarah took a deep breath. I think it's time we talked, really talked, about everything." And so, as the night deepened, the truth began to unfold. The mural became a backdrop to their conversation, each painted memory a testament to the complex tapestry of their family history. Laughter mingled with tears as they shared stories, confronted old wounds, and began the process of healing. Ethan, watching his mother and aunt reconnect, felt a sense of wonder. The mural had become more than just a painting. It was a catalyst for change, a means of bringing his family back together. As dawn broke, casting a soft light over the room and the newly revealed truths, Ethan realized that this was just the beginning. There were more stories to be told, more secrets to be uncovered. But now, they would face them together as a family united by love, loss, and the healing power of art. The impact of the mural project began to ripple outward, touching not just Ethan's family, but his school life as well. As he walked into his art class on Monday morning, his mind was still buzzing with the revelations and emotions of the weekend. His teacher, Ms. Hendricks, noticed the change in him immediately. "Ethan," she said, her eyes bright with curiosity, "you seem different today. More inspired somehow. Did something happen over the weekend?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before deciding to share. "I've been working on a mural with my aunt," he explained. It's not just painting. It's like we're telling our family story through art." Ms. Hendricks listened intently as Ethan described the project, her excitement growing with each word. "That sounds incredible, Ethan. Would you be willing to share some photos of your work with the class?" Before he knew it, Ethan found himself standing in front of his classmates, his phone connected to the projector, flipping through images of the mural. As he explained each section, he could see his friends leaning forward in their seats, their eyes wide with interest. "Wow, Ethan," his friend Jake exclaimed. "I didn't know you could paint like that." "It's not just me," Ethan replied, feeling a surge of pride. "It's a collaboration with my aunt. She's teaching me so much." As the class discussed the mural, an idea began to form. It started with a comment from Lily, a quiet girl who rarely spoke up in class. What if we did something like that here?" she suggested hesitantly. "Not just in art class, but like a big project for the whole school?" The room erupted with excited chatter. Ms. Hendricks had to clap her hands to regain order, but her eyes were shining with enthusiasm. "That's an excellent idea, Lily. What do you all think? Should we propose a school-wide mural project?" The response was overwhelmingly positive. As they began to brainstorm ideas, Ethan felt a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. He found himself sharing techniques he'd learned from Margaret, suggesting ways to incorporate different styles and themes. "We could have each grade work on a different section," he proposed. "And maybe we could include the school's history and important events from each year." The idea snowballed quickly. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the school. Ethan found himself surrounded by curious classmates, all eager to hear more about the mural project. As he walked home that afternoon, Ethan's mind was racing with possibilities. He couldn't wait to tell Margaret about the impact their project was having. When he burst through the front door, he found her sitting with his parents in the living room, all wearing expressions of surprise at his exuberance. "Aunt Margaret," he exclaimed, barely pausing to catch his breath. "You won't believe what happened at school today." He launched into the story, describing how his classmates had been inspired by their mural, how the idea had spread, and how the school was now considering a mural project of its own. "And the best part," he finished, his eyes shining, "is that they want me to help lead it. Ms. Hendricks asked if you might be willing to come in and talk to the class about your techniques." Margaret's face lit up with pride and joy. "Oh, Ethan, that's wonderful. Of course, I'd be happy to help." As they discussed the school project, Ethan could see his parents exchanging glances. There was still tension there, lingering effects of old wounds, but there was something else too, a growing acceptance, perhaps even a tentative warmth towards Margaret. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's school buzzed with activity. The mural project had been approved, and planning was in full swing. Margaret visited his art class, demonstrating techniques and sharing stories about the power of collaborative art. Ethan watched with pride as his classmates hung on her every word, seeing his aunt through new eyes. The school mural began to take shape, a vibrant tapestry of colors and stories that stretched along the main hallway. Ethan found himself at the center of it all, guiding his peers, sharing ideas, and watching in awe as their collective vision came to life. One afternoon, as he stood back to admire their progress, Ethan felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Ms. Hendricks smiling at him. "You've really brought something special to our school, Ethan," she said warmly. "This project, it's not just about art. It's bringing people together, helping them share their stories. You should be very proud." As Ethan looked at the mural, seeing the way it wove together so many different experiences and perspectives, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What had started as a private project with his aunt had grown into something that touched the entire community. But even as he basked in the glow of this success, a small part of him couldn't help but wonder, what other secrets, what other stories were still waiting to be revealed? The mural at home was far from finished, and Ethan had a feeling that the biggest revelations were yet to come. As the school mural neared completion and the excitement of the project began to settle, Ethan found himself grappling with unexpected emotions. The nightly sessions with Margaret continued, but there was a new urgency to them, a sense that time was running out. One evening, as they worked on a particularly intricate section of their home mural, Ethan's brush hesitated mid-stroke. Margaret noticed immediately. "What's wrong, Ethan?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan took a deep breath, struggling to put his feelings into words. I'm scared," he finally admitted. "What happens when we finish the mural? Will you leave again?" Margaret set down her brush, turning to face Ethan fully. Her eyes were filled with understanding and a hint of sadness. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, "is that what's been bothering you?" Ethan nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Everything's changed since you came. Mom and Dad are talking more. I feel like I understand our family better. But what if it all goes back to how it was before when you're gone?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then she picked up her brush again and dipped it in a deep, swirling blue. "You know, Ethan," she began, her brush moving in slow, deliberate strokes, "art isn't just about the finished product. It's about the process, the journey we take to create it." As she spoke, the blue on the canvas began to take shape, a whirlpool of emotion, drawing the eye into its depths. "Right now you're feeling afraid. That fear is valid, it's real, but instead of letting it paralyze you, why don't we use it?" Ethan watched, fascinated, as Margaret continued to paint. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean, "Let's paint your fear," Margaret replied. "Let's give it form. Let's explore it. Because when we face our fears, when we really look at them, they often lose their power over us." Inspired by her words, Ethan picked up his own brush. Together, they began to paint their anxieties and fears. Ethan's strokes were sharp and jagged at first, representing his fear of loss and change. But as they worked, something began to shift. "You see," Margaret continued, her voice soft but steady, "the mural isn't ending anything, Ethan. It's a beginning. It's opening up conversations, healing old wounds. That won't stop just because we put down our brushes." As they painted, Ethan felt the knot in his chest begin to loosen. The fear on the canvas began to transform, the harsh lines softening, new colors weaving through the darkness. "But what if—" Ethan hesitated, then pushed on. "What if there are more secrets, more things we don't know?" Margaret's brush paused for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "There probably are, Ethan. Life is full of mysteries, and families. Well, families are complicated, but that's okay. We don't have to know everything all at once. What matters is that we're open to learning, to understanding." They continued to paint late into the night, their fears and hopes mingling on the canvas. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, Ethan stepped back to look at what they had created. The section they had been working on was a swirling mix of dark and light, fear and hope intertwined. But unlike before, the darker elements didn't seem so frightening anymore. They were simply part of a larger, more beautiful whole. "You see," Margaret said, putting an arm around Ethan's shoulders, "our fears, our anxieties, they're part of us, but they don't define us. And when we share them, when we face them together, they can become something beautiful." Ethan leaned into his aunt's embrace, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The mural wasn't just telling their family's past anymore. It was helping to shape their future. As they cleaned up their supplies, Ethan realized something. The mural might be nearing completion, but their journey was far from over. There were still stories to be told, truths to be uncovered. But now, instead of fearing what might be revealed, he found himself looking forward to it. "Aunt Margaret," he said as they were about to leave the room, "thank you for everything." Margaret smiled, her eyes shining with affection. "No, Ethan, thank you. You've helped heal this family more than you know." As they headed downstairs for breakfast, Ethan felt a new sense of confidence. Whatever secrets still lurked in his family's past, whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew now that they would face them together, with open hearts, honest words, and the healing power of art. The day of the school mural's unveiling arrived with a buzz of excitement. The hallways were filled with students, teachers, and parents, all eager to see the finished product. Ethan stood before the covered wall, his heart racing with a mix of pride and nervousness. As the principal made a short speech about the power of community and creativity, Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd. His parents were there, standing close together, their faces beaming with pride. And next to them was Margaret, her presence a comforting anchor in the sea of faces. The moment arrived, and with a dramatic flourish, the covering was pulled away. A collective gasp filled the air as the mural was revealed in all its glory. It was a kaleidoscope of colors and images, each section telling a different story of the school and its students. Ethan felt a surge of emotion as he looked at the finished piece. He could see echoes of his family's mural in the techniques and styles used. But this was something entirely new. It was a testament to the power of shared creativity, of what could happen when a community came together. As the crowd moved closer to examine the details, Ethan felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see his mother, Sarah, her eyes glistening with tears. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful. I'm so proud of you." Before Ethan could respond, he noticed a commotion near the entrance of the hall. A man had just walked in, his presence causing a ripple of whispers through the crowd. Ethan didn't recognize him, but he saw Margaret stiffen, her face paling slightly. "Who's that?" Ethan asked, curiosity overriding his moment of triumph. Sarah's expression tightened. That's David. He was a friend of Margaret's a long time ago." Ethan watched as David made his way through the crowd, his eyes fixed on Margaret. There was something in his gaze that made Ethan uneasy, a mix of familiarity and challenge that seemed out of place in the celebratory atmosphere. Margaret stood frozen, her eyes wide with what Ethan realized was fear. He had never seen his aunt look so vulnerable, so unsure. Without thinking, he moved to stand beside her, offering silent support. "Margaret," David said as he approached, his voice carrying a weight of shared history. "It's been a long time." Margaret nodded stiffly. "David, I didn't expect to see you here." "I heard about the mural project," David replied, his eyes scanning the artwork. "Seems you haven't lost your touch." There was an undercurrent to his words that Ethan couldn't quite understand, but he could feel the tension radiating from Margaret. He watched as his parents exchanged worried glances, clearly aware of some context he was missing. "Perhaps this isn't the best time or place for a reunion," Sarah interjected, her voice firm but polite. David's gaze shifted to Sarah, a flicker of something, regret, defiance, crossing his face. "No, I suppose not. But we can't keep running from the past forever, can we?" With those cryptic words hanging in the air, David turned and left as abruptly as he had arrived. The excitement of the mural unveiling had been overshadowed by this strange encounter, leaving Ethan with a whirlwind of questions. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan noticed Margaret trembling slightly. His mother moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Let's go home," Sarah said softly. I think it's time we talked about everything." The ride home was silent, heavy with unspoken words. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information he had. Who was David? What past were they running from? And how did it all connect to the story they had been painting on their mural? As they entered the house, Ethan couldn't help but feel that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The secrets that had been hinted at, the stories left untold, it all seemed to be coming to a head. His father cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "I think we should all sit down," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "There are things we need to discuss as a family." Ethan looked at the faces of his parents and his aunt, seeing a mix of fear, determination, and a glimmer of hope. Whatever was about to be revealed, he realized, would change everything. The mural they had been working on wasn't just art anymore. It was a key, unlocking the hidden chambers of their family's past. As they settled into the living room, Ethan's heart pounded with anticipation. The truth, it seemed, was finally ready to be unveiled. The living room was thick with tension as Ethan and his family settled into their seats. Margaret sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Sarah and John exchanged meaningful glances. Ethan felt like he was balancing on a tightrope, teetering between the known and the unknown. Sarah took a deep breath, breaking the silence. "Ethan, honey, there's something we need to tell you, something we should have told you a long time ago." Ethan's heart raced. He looked from his mother to his father, then to Margaret, whose eyes were fixed on the floor. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. John leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Son, the relationship between your mother and Margaret, it's more complicated than we've let on." Margaret lifted her head, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "Ethan," she said softly, "I'm not just your aunt. I'm your mother's twin sister." The words hung in the air, heavy and transformative. Ethan felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "Twin sister?" he repeated, his mind struggling to process this new information. But why didn't I know? Why keep it a secret?" Sarah's voice was thick with emotion as she began to explain. "It's a long and painful story, Ethan. Margaret and I, we were inseparable as children. But as we grew older, things became complicated." Margaret picked up the thread, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "We both fell in love with the same man, David, the man you saw today. It created a rift between us, one that seemed impossible to bridge." John reached out, taking Sarah's hand in his. "Your mother and I met shortly after, but the damage had been done. The relationship between your mother and Margaret was strained, to say the least. But why didn't you tell me?" Ethan pressed, feeling a mix of confusion and hurt. "Why pretend Margaret was just a distant aunt?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. We thought we were protecting you, and ourselves, if I'm being honest. It was easier to keep Margaret at a distance than to confront the pain of the past." As the truth unfolded, Ethan's mind raced back to the mural they had been creating. Suddenly, certain elements took on new meaning. The matching girls in old photographs, the subtle tensions in family gatherings, the unspoken sadness that often lingered in Margaret's eyes. "The accident your grandfather died in," Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It happened the day of the big fight between Sarah and me. We were all so angry, so caught up in our own drama. If we hadn't been—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Sarah reached out, taking her sister's hand. "It wasn't your fault, Maggie. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was an accident." Ethan watched in awe as years of tension seemed to dissolve between the two women. He saw his mother not just as a parent, but as a person with her own struggles and regrets. And Margaret, his aunt, his teacher, his friend, suddenly appeared in a new light, her actions and emotions taking on deeper meaning. "So, the mural," Ethan said slowly, piecing things together. "It wasn't just about family history. It was about healing, wasn't it? About bringing everyone back together?" Margaret nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "You're a perceptive boy, Ethan." "Yes. When I came back, when I saw how talented you were, how much you reminded me of your grandfather, I thought maybe, through art, we could start to mend what was broken." John cleared his throat, his eyes misty. "And you have, both of you. This mural project, it's done more to heal this family than years of silence ever could." As the night wore on, more truths came to light. Stories of childhood adventures and teenage rivalries, of shared dreams and bitter disappointments. With each revelation, Ethan felt his understanding of his family deepen, the mural in his mind growing richer and more complex. As dawn broke, casting a soft light through the windows, Ethan looked at his family with new eyes. They were flawed, human, but bound together by love and shared history. The secrets that had once threatened to tear them apart now lay bare, no longer holding power over them. "So," Ethan said, breaking a moment of contemplative silence, "what happens now?" Sarah and Margaret exchanged glances, then looked to John, who nodded encouragingly. Sarah took a deep breath. "Now we move forward. Together. No more secrets, no more pretending. We're a family, all of us." As they all stood, exhausted but somehow lighter, Ethan felt a surge of inspiration. "I think I know how we should finish the mural," he said, his eyes shining with renewed purpose. His family looked at him expectantly, and in that moment, Ethan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their story continuing to unfold, brush stroke by brushstroke, on the canvas of their shared lives. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations for Ethan and his family. With the truth finally out in the open, it seemed as though a dam had broken, releasing years of pent-up feelings and unspoken words. Ethan found himself spending more time in front of the mural, studying it with new eyes. Every brushstroke, every color choice now held deeper meaning. He could see the places where Margaret's hand had hesitated, where his mother's influence was strongest. It was like reading a visual diary of their family's history. One evening, as Ethan stood contemplating a particular section of the mural, Margaret joined him. "You know," she said softly, "there's still one part of the story we haven't told you." Ethan turned to her, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the mural. "It's about your father, John. He played a bigger role in all of this than you might think." Just then, Sarah and John entered the room. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what Margaret was about to reveal. For a moment, tension filled the air, but then John nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. "Ethan," John began, his voice steady, but tinged with emotion. "Before I met your mother, I was friends with both her and Margaret. In fact, I was there the night of their big fight." Ethan listened intently as his father recounted the events of that fateful night. How he had tried to mediate between the sisters, how he had witnessed the pain and anger that tore them apart, and how, in the aftermath, he had fallen in love with Sarah. "I always felt guilty," John admitted, his eyes meeting Margaret's. "Like I had chosen sides, like I was part of the reason you two stayed estranged for so long." Margaret shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "Oh, John, we were all young and foolish. You were just trying to do the right thing." As the full picture of their shared past came into focus, Ethan felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Sadness for the years of separation and misunderstanding, anger at the circumstances that had driven his family apart, but also a profound sense of hope. Because here they were years later, finally confronting the truth together. "I think I understand now," Ethan said slowly, his gaze moving between his parents and Margaret. "The mural, it's not just about the past, is it? It's about who we are now, who we're becoming." Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "That's right, sweetheart. It's about healing, about coming together, despite our mistakes and misunderstandings." Inspired by this new understanding, Ethan picked up a brush. With sure strokes, he began to add to the mural, incorporating elements that represented the truths they had uncovered. An intertwined tree representing the sisters' bond, a bridge symbolizing John's role in their lives, and at the center, a heart formed by many different brushstrokes, signifying their united family. As he worked, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The mural was no longer just a project or a family history. It had become a living testament to their journey of reconciliation and growth. Hours passed as they all contributed to this new section of the mural. When they finally stepped back to admire their work, the transformation was striking. What had once been a beautiful but somewhat fragmented collection of memories had become a cohesive narrative of love, loss, and redemption. "It's perfect," Margaret whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Sarah wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders. "No, it's not perfect, but it's us. All of us together." As the family stood there, united in front of their shared creation, Ethan realized that this was just the beginning. The mural, like their family, would continue to evolve and grow. There would be new stories to add, new challenges to face, but they would do it together. "So," Ethan said, a mischievous glint in his eye, "does this mean I get 2 birthday presents now? One from Mom and one from Aunt Margaret?" The room erupted in laughter, the remaining tension dissipating like morning mist. As they headed downstairs for a much-needed family dinner, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for what the future held. Their family story was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it felt like it was just beginning. The day of the mural's grand reveal to the extended family and close friends arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. Ethan woke early, his mind racing with thoughts of how their relatives would react to both the artwork and the truths it represented. As he helped his parents and Margaret prepare the house for guests, Ethan couldn't help but notice the change in their dynamics. There was an ease in their interactions now, a warmth that had been missing before. It made his heart swell with happiness. Guests began to arrive in the afternoon. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends filed in, their curiosity palpable. Ethan overheard snippets of conversation, whispers about Margaret's return, and the mysterious project that had consumed the family for weeks. Finally, when everyone had gathered in the living room, John cleared his throat to get their attention. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We've asked you here today not just to show you a piece of art, but to share a journey our family has been on." Sarah stepped forward, taking her husband's hand. "What you're about to see is more than just a mural. It's our story, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And in creating it, we've discovered some truths about ourselves and each other." Margaret moved to stand beside her sister, and a ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Many of them hadn't seen the twins together in years. "We've learned," Margaret added, her voice clear and strong, "that family is about more than blood or shared history. It's about choosing to love and support each other, even when it's difficult." Ethan felt a swell of pride as he watched his family address the crowd. He realized that this moment was as much a part of their journey as the creation of the mural itself. With a nod from his parents, Ethan stepped forward to pull back the curtain that had been hiding the mural. As the fabric fell away, a collective gasp filled the room. The mural was a masterpiece of color and emotion. It told the story of their family from its earliest days to the present, with all its joys and sorrows laid bare. But more than that, it showed a path forward, a future filled with hope and reconciliation. As the guests moved closer to examine the details, Ethan found himself explaining different sections, sharing the stories behind certain images. He watched as understanding dawned on faces, saw tears being wiped away and hugs being exchanged. In one corner of the room, Ethan noticed his mother and Margaret deep in conversation with their older cousin, Rebecca. There were tears in Rebecca's eyes as she embraced both sisters, years of misunderstanding seeming to melt away. Nearby, John was showing his brother the section that depicted their childhood adventures. Both men were laughing, the joy of shared memories evident on their faces. As the afternoon wore on, something remarkable began to happen. Inspired by the openness and honesty displayed in the mural, family members began to share their own stories. Old grudges were addressed, apologies were made, and forgiveness was offered. Ethan realized that the mural had become more than just their family's story. It had become a catalyst for healing within their entire extended family. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the gathering, Margaret called for everyone's attention. "There's one last thing we'd like to share with you all," she said, her eyes finding Ethan's in the crowd. Sarah nodded encouragingly, and Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding. "The mural isn't finished," he announced, "and we don't think it ever will be, because our story isn't over. We'd like to invite all of you to add to it, to make it a living history of our entire family." A murmur of excitement ran through the crowd. As Ethan and his parents distributed brushes and paints, the mural came alive once more. Family members young and old added their own touches. A memory here, a hope for the future there. As Ethan watched, He felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Margaret smiling down at him. "You did it, Ethan," she said softly. "You brought us all together." Ethan shook his head, his own smile wide and genuine. "No, we did it. All of us, together." As the night drew to a close and the last of the guests departed, Ethan stood before the mural one last time. It was different now, filled with even more life and love than before. But at its core, it remained the same, a testament to the power of truth, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The mural, like their family, would continue to grow and change. There would be new stories to add, new challenges to face. But Ethan knew now that they would face them together, their shared history a foundation for whatever the future might bring. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. The secrets that had once threatened to tear his family apart had become the very thing that brought them together. And in that transformation, Ethan had discovered the true power of art, not just to represent life, but to change it.